Hello everyone, my name is Protesilaos, also known as Prot. In this video blog I want to talk to you about a topic that I think needs to be discussed. And this concerns the issue, or the problematic, if you will, problématique, of whether technology is inherently political or not, and by extension, whether free software partakes of this quality, whether free software is inherently political or not. What inspired me to do this video is a recent publication by Bryan Lunduke. It is, I believe, the latest episode of the Lunduke Show, titled Technology is Not Political. And in this episode, Bryan expresses this opinion of his, that technology in and of itself is just a technical endeavor, and it does not have any political qualities attached to it. So what I want to do in this video of mine is quote from Bryan Lunduke from the episode I just mentioned, quote the part that concerns free software, and then use this as a basis to formulate my counterpoint to Bryan's thesis. Just to be clear, what I'm about to do now is not in any way an attack against the person Bryan Lunduke. I am not trying to steer some controversy. I am not trying to silence anyone. I am not trying to target anyone. This is just my opinion, and I am presenting it in a spirit of open-mindedness in the broader debate that we are having here. I am just contributing to this debate. And I want to make this crystal clear because I am well aware of the recrudescence, the re-emergence of the mob rule, of ochlocracy. The Greek-derived word for it is ochlocracy. I am well aware of the evils of ochlocracy. I am well aware of the fact that people are targeted, that people are silenced and are sent into the margins. So I don't want to be a part of the mob. That's why I wanted to be clear right at the outset. With these out of the way, I will proceed to quote from Bryan's recent episode and then proceed from there. So this is with regard to free software. Quote, "Once you see something as a movement of people with an ideology, politics comes into play with that. And to say that there are no politics involved in free software would clearly be wrong. Clearly, that would be wrong. However, free software in and of itself is not political at all. It is simply a license applied to software where source code is available." End quote. And I have highlighted the very last sentence because I believe this is the issue that needs to be examined at some further depth in order to avoid broad generalizations such as the one that Bryan is making over here. What is a license? What is a license? You may say a license is a legal document that stipulates certain conditions, and whatever you can do with the items that are governed by this document is limited in scope to these provisions, these legal provisions. This, of course, would be correct. This is the function of a license, to regulate certain modes of behavior. However, this is not just what a license is. A license is, if you want to look at it a bit more broadly, a bit more generally, a bit more abstract, a license is the embodiment of certain values that we have at present time. In this case, it is the values, the beliefs, the concepts that we have about property rights, about the presence of intellectual property. What do we think is intellectual property? What is the meaning of it? What are the implications of it? What are the conditions? What are the norms in which we may behave with regard to intellectual property, to property in general? So in this regard, a license embodies our politics. A license is the vivid realization of the ideas we have about our intersubjective experience, about the things that concern our behavior between us, between you and me and the others. So a license, law in general, is an embodiment of the institutions that we have, of the rules of custom that we have developed, and how we codify these in written text, and we attach legal value to them, and then based on these values, fastened upon this construct, we have our binary of reward and punishment, of you can do certain things or you cannot do some other things. So a license is, in other words, a product of politics. It is an expression of politics. It is part and parcel of politics. It is inseparably linked to the human intersubjective experience, to the human life world. So a license is politics. And in our case, a proprietary license, a license that is attached to a piece of software that you do not have access to the source code, that restricts you from using it in a free manner, embodies the values of the establishment, which are the values whereby intellectual property is tantamount to physical property, and it is treated in the same way as physical goods. So ideas are thought as goods, and this is codified in a proprietary license, this set of beliefs. And this set of beliefs is, of course, linked to a large corpus of legislation, to institutions and regulatory bodies, to prison systems, etc., that enforce those values. A license is not simply a license. It is an entire view of the world. It is an entire worldview encapsulated in a legal document. And this, of course, is the same for free software licenses, because free software licenses codify again in legal language, in a manner that makes sense when brought before a court or whatnot. They codify again a political stance. And this political stance basically, very basically, is opposed to the beliefs of the establishment with regard to intellectual property, specifically intellectual property concerning software. We believe, when it comes to free software, and let's be more specific, let's talk about copyleft software. So let's talk about the GNU General Public License. And so this is the strong version of free software. We believe the basic idea that we have is that people should have the freedom to share code. This is not a technical requirement. This is not a prerequisite for our text editors to work, or for our calculators to compare numbers and to add or subtract numbers. It's none of that. It is not a technical requirement. It's a political objective that we have, to emancipate people from the injustices, the shackles of the proprietary world that is built around software. And let us recall, if you will, the story of how Richard Stallman started thinking about free software back in the day when he was still at the university. I will, by the way, also link to a transcript of Richard Stallman's talk where he talks about this issue. So he was at the university. Very basically, the story is that they had a printer, and this printer came with some proprietary software in binary form, and so this printer was malfunctioning. I'm not sure exactly what the problem was right now, but it didn't work properly, and they were having lots of inconveniences because of this behavior. So, of course, Stallman and his colleagues were programmers, were systems programmers. They could fix the issue fairly easily. So what Richard wanted to do is basically to modify the source code so that when the printer would stop working, it would send a notification to the people over there waiting in line for their documents to be printed, and then basically saying, okay, come fix me because I don't work. So they wouldn't have to wait in the line pointlessly. So basically the idea is that Stallman and his colleagues did not have the right to do so. They did not have the access to the source code, and they were prohibited of interfering with the program that controlled the printer. So of course Stallman uses this as a case in point of how unjust proprietary software is. And of course, this belief of his is specific to software, and that's why he made the free software movement. But the underlying ideals that Stallman had about the subject are not limited to software, of course. Again, they are political. They are not technical considerations of how software should be designed. They are not technical considerations about how we should write code. They are none of that. It's about how we as people should use software when it comes to our intersubjective relations. To use software so that we do not exercise control, so that some humans do not control some other humans, as is the case with proprietary software. Because in the proprietary world, the person who owns the license is the person who controls the users. So this is, of course, how the free software movement came about, how GNU specifically came into being, exactly because it was a political stance against the state of affairs that Richard Stallman was present in and disagreed with. So this is about the GPL. As I said, I will link to this transcript of his where he talks about this issue. But let's come back to this quote from Bryan Lunduke, and I will quote it again, the very last sentence. It is simply a license applied to software where source code is available, end quote. This software that has source code readily available did not come out of nothing. It is not just serendipity that allowed this software to be readily available in source code. It is not just at random that a specific license was attached to it to the effect of granting, of bestowing upon you, the user, freedoms, the four freedoms that we know of free software. This did not just happen out of a technical necessity. It happened out of a political stance against the prevailing opinions of our politics. Again, this is a political subject. But if you want, you may say, okay, but on the very specific, on the very narrow subject of the functionality, for example, a text editor, you can use it to type stuff. This very act is exactly the same regardless of whether the source code is available or not, and no matter what the license is. And you would be correct. In a very technical sense, in a very narrow sense, you would be correct, because this does not make any difference. It doesn't matter if this text editor is free software or proprietary software for the specific task of drawing glyphs on a screen. But this would be a reductionist fallacy, because you would be narrowing the scope down to an issue that is not corresponding to reality. You would be treating free software without the most important aspect of free software, which is the political part of it. That's the thing. The reason that we are using free software, it's not because it is technically superior as free software. Oftentimes, we are using software and we are complaining about all sorts of things. We are using free software. And we say, hey, look, I don't like this thing, and this proprietary solution does it best. For example, we have an image editor, which, by the way, has a controversial name according to some people. The text editor is the GNU Image Manipulation Program. But we use this program even though we know that there are proprietary solutions out there that are, according to the people who are experts in the domain, those proprietary solutions are superior to the GNU Image Manipulation Program. Yet we are still using the free software option instead of those proprietary solutions. Are we fools? We are using it because of the politics, not just because of technical considerations that we make. We also have technical considerations. There also are technical benefits to software freedom. For example, when you are able to share code, chances are that the end product will be a better product. That's the very general idea, that open source also helps with better coding. But this is not the essence of what free software is about. This is a nice extra to have. The essence of free software is political. And this is something that we should always bear in mind, because if we lose sight of this, and if we go down this slippery slope of treating all software as merely technical, then we are losing a very important basis to argue against software that is inherently unjust. For example, DRM, Digital Restrictions Management. DRM is technology designed to hamper users. It is designed to empower the proprietary overlords. It is designed in such a way as to enforce a certain political state of affairs. And we are here saying that DRM is just software, DRM is just an algorithm that just calculates stuff. That would be false. DRM is designed specifically for a political end. And this political end is to protect the powers that be when it comes to economic interests. Software patents are attached to these. And then you have all the other restrictions that come in legal form. All are interwoven. DRM and the patents and all these things. We cannot simply treat technology in a vacuum, because technology does not exist in a vacuum. Technology exists in the real world. And in the real world, we have people, we have institutions, we have law, we have economic interests, conflicting agendas, etc., etc. So, as in the free software world, we should always be mindful of the fact that what we have here as free software is part technical, but also it is part political. And I want to again reference Richard Stallman, the much maligned Richard Marcus Stallman. Recently he has been in a lot of trouble, in part because of ochlocracy, in part because of his own errors. Anyhow, Richard Stallman, if you listen to his talks, when he talks about free software and stuff, he explains very well how software, proprietary software, so a proprietary license attached to some technology, how it is used for surveillance, how it is used to give more power to the oligopolistic interests that exist in our economy, that exist in the software industry and in other industries as well. How technology is used to pursue political ends. So this is basically what I had to say. I think we should not be reductionist. We should not try to do these mental gymnastics where we treat technology as something that exists in a vacuum. We should treat technology as something that exists in the real world. We should treat it as something that we as humans experience, as something that is embedded in our relations between individuals, relations between users and mega corporations, relations between communities that exist under certain political conditions, in certain social, economic, educational circumstances. So we should be mindful of the fact that we are also a political movement. We are a technical movement as well, but we are also a political movement, and we should not be shy about that. Finally, we should not conflate and confuse politics in the general sense with the politics of America or with the politics of a certain issue. For example, migration politics or whatever, the politics of some expansionist agenda in the other side of the world. This is a specific aspect of politics, but not of politics in general. And what this means when it comes to free software is that free software is, of course, political, but it is not about each and every item on the agenda. It is about the matters of politics that pertain to the things that relate to software, in this case, intellectual property, and perhaps some concomitant issues in the economy. It doesn't mean that it covers each and every topic out there. It doesn't also mean that it is not political because of not covering all those things. So these are some thoughts. As I said, I am not attacking the person Bryan Lunduke. I am actually a subscriber to his show in an RSS feed. I have been following Bryan's work for the last maybe 2 years, and I like what he does, and I will continue to follow him because I do like what he does. And in fact, this episode of his, Technology is Not Political, is again a good episode. He raises good points. But I just wanted to stress this specific issue here that I quoted, because I think that we should be mindful of these issues that I brought up. Otherwise, we can go down the wrong path. So these are just some thoughts and observations. That's all for now, folks. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.